Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Tech Leaders Launchpad livestream. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Andrew Murphy. I'm the founder of Tech Leaders Launchpad. I started my leadership journey 15 years ago, and when I did that, there wasn't a lot of support out there. There weren't the books, there weren't the resources, there weren't the websites, and there weren't the live streams that exist nowadays to help tech leaders get better. And so when I decided I was going to start this journey of helping people become better tech leaders, I figured I would do as much as I can to contribute towards that growing knowledge base of being a better tech leader. And part of the way I'm doing that is by sharing the people that I learn from, sharing my coaches, my mentors, the people that inspire me, and the people that make me a better leader with you, my audience, as much as I possibly can. And in the vein of doing exactly that, today I have with me April Lea. April, you've had a very varied career. You're currently working as head of product at REA Group here in Australia. But I like to start things off with a question that is not about your career, but about your nerdiness. So tell me, what is your favorite technology gadget that is not your computer?
When you told me that you were going to ask this question, I had to think long and hard about it because I wanted it to be something that was going to be cool. But unfortunately, my thing is not cool. It is, in fact, my noise cancelling headphones. They are my most favorite tech gadget that are not my computer because they just enable me to zone out the world when I need to, but they can also deliver some amazing auditory noises into my ears when I need to listen to some music. So I am my noise cancelling headphones.
Which specific ones do you have? Because I've tried lots of different brands and lots of different models, and in ear, over ear, and there's all upsides and downsides.
Yeah, so I can't really handle the in-ear ones. So AirPods and things like that, for that reason, I can only sustain them for a little bit of time because my ears get sore. So I definitely prefer the over-ear ones. And I've got, which I think they're a bit of like a cult favorite, the Bose Quiet Comfort 35s. They have they've been kicking. I've had to replace all the padding on them multiple times by now and everything, but they don't cause pain on top of your head when when they're resting on you. So they're not that heavy on the side of your ears, and they do a great job at canceling out noise when you need them to. And the sound quality is just sublime.
Yeah, I had the older version of those many years ago, and exactly the same. I just replaced them again and again, just got the padding replaced, and they got so old and used that the battery was just terrible in the end. It would last less than an hour, and I was just like, it's time to change. And instead of getting the new QC35s, I got the Sony 1000 XM4s. And honestly, I regret my decision. So I think whenever those die, it's going to be back to the Bose ones. They're the old solid favorites.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with them. I think Bose have really established themselves as the front runners in that regard.
Yeah. One of the problems that I have with them, and this is going super nerdy. I've got my computer, I've got my iPad, I've got my iPhone, and I actually don't use my Bluetooth headsets for video calls. I use these, which are some random Logitech ones that don't use the Bluetooth protocol. And I do that deliberately because I got so frustrated with being in the middle of a video call. My phone starts ringing as somebody's calling me, and then it switches my headphones to my phone, and I stop being able to hear the people on the video call, and they can't hear me. And I've never found a headphone that doesn't do that.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. I think the configuration of your Bluetooth headsets and things like that, when you've got them paired to multiple devices like that, I can really resonate with what you're saying, because for that exact reason, I've got a pair of work headphones that I wear that's only paired to my work computer, and then I've got my one that's compared to my phone and my personal laptop for that exact reason, because I'd be in the middle of like a work call and boom, suddenly my phone starts ringing, and it's always a telemarketer as well, which gives me makes me crankier, and it just ruins the whole thing. So yeah, I can really relate.
But we're not just here to talk about headphones. April, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, your career, and why this particular topic is one that you're passionate about? We're here to talk about neurodiversity in technology. Why has your career, why has your experience been one that has led to that being the topic that you want to discuss?
Yeah, for sure. So as everyone knows by now, my name is April. I am currently serving as the head of product at REA Group, but I started my career over 10 years ago now as a software engineer. And over that time period, I very quickly realized that staying in one location or staying in one job wasn't quite me. So I've been like a bit of a serial job hopper, like every 18 months to 2 years, because I would just get bored. I'd kind of hit my peak of performance in my role and just immediately be like, okay, I want to go do something else now. I want to go do something else now. And that's kind of been a pretty consistent pattern throughout my entire life, in fact. But I was not an early diagnosed neurodivergent person. My brother and my sister were, but I was the supposedly normal child out of the three of us. But in 2020, that came to be not quite so true, where I actually experienced a period of autistic burnout that I had to drop out of the workforce for about 6 to 7 months to rehabilitate back and, regain my skills that I had essentially lost as a result of that burnout. And I was diagnosed with level 2 autism and ADHD inattentive type as a result of that whole process. And I think that on some level, I had always known that there was something a little bit different about the way that I did things, particularly once I started hitting leadership positions at work. I was finding it, I didn't quite understand, why certain things were done the way that they were, and I would actively oppose the norms and the status quo that had been implemented, because it didn't work for me. And so I was like, well, that's not going to work for, my team. Like, I can't be that exceptional that I'm the only person that would have a problem with this. And so I actively started to seek out different ways to lead people that were going to help that unique person as an individual, as opposed to, apply a cookie cutter process to them. I've been diagnosed since 2020 now, and that has been a huge journey for me. But over that period, I've realized I faced all sorts of discrimination and things like that in the workplace. And I've also had to acknowledge that the way that I used to work, I can no longer work like that, because that is ultimately what led me to experiencing burnout in the first place. And so it's a topic that's really dear to my heart for that reason, because I want to help make the workplace and, the working economy a more neuro-affirming environment that allows people to recognize everyone as human beings. Recognizing the neurodiversity of the workforce and catering as such.
Yeah, I resonate a lot with what you've said. I think I've mentioned it on this live stream series previously. I think I have, but I was diagnosed as a young adult, basically, as being on the autistic spectrum, and it's been a journey for me of trying to work out what that means for me and how I work as a professional, knowing that is part of who I am and part of who I think, and very similar challenges with you. Of my mum tells stories of when I was a kid at school. And if there was a rule that the school put in place, if there was a rule that I didn't understand why that rule existed, I just ignored it. Because why would I live by a rule that doesn't make sense? And so I definitely resonate with that. We're hopefully going to touch both sides of neurodiversity today through a leadership lens, in terms of both being a leader who is neurodiverse and leading a team that potentially contains neurodiverse people. So hopefully that we can touch both sides of that. If you've got questions for April or I, please post them in wherever you're watching this: YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitch. If you're watching this on LinkedIn and the user experience sucks because it's LinkedIn, please feel free to hop over to the Tech Leaders Launchpad live stream on YouTube. It will be a much better user experience for you. And this is probably why I don't have LinkedIn top voice, because every live stream I slam LinkedIn. So in terms of your journey, can you share like an example, April, of where this affected you deeply, like something that happened to you, either from the lens of the way that you think about the world and the way that your brain works, that kind of having an effect on you, or in the way of the way people might expect that to happen, and the kind of bias and prejudice that comes along from talking about this kind of stuff openly?
Yeah, of course. The most prominent one that comes to my mind is off the back of having to leave the workforce and ultimately completely reimagine and reinvent myself as a working professional in the tech industry. My occupational therapist, and my therapy team at the time were basically saying to me that I would have to actively disclose my disability in order to obtain the accommodations that I needed in order to be able to get back into the workplace. And we know that there are anti-discrimination laws, and there's, the Disability Protections Act and things that should ultimately help organizations recognize that they have got, obligations in this particular area. And so as I began interviewing to reintegrate back into the workforce, I was interviewing for roles that I was more than capable of fulfilling. And for many of them, I would get through until the final stage interviews. And the minute, however, that I would disclose that I had a disability and that I would need accommodations, I almost never received another call back. And I remember one particular interview that I had where it was down to me and one other person, and they were all so interested in me. And I could tell that, I basically had this thing in the bag. And, they basically said at the end of the interview, is there anything else that, you would like to share? And I said, well, yes, there is actually. I am autistic, and so I would need some accommodations implemented into this role to enable me to thrive. And the minute that I said that, the collective change in the room, like it was almost like you could cut the tension in the air with a knife. And ultimately the entire panel of people that I was sitting in front of all basically just disengaged at that moment. You go from, body language, we know, someone's leaning forward and, someone's actively engaged in the conversation, they'll be displaying all of those, mannerisms that say positive things about the interaction. And then the minute that someone will kind of lean back, they want to disengage from that. And that happened with every single person on that panel. Yep, exactly like that, Andrew, exactly. And the lead interviewer, the CEO of this, or the managing director of this company that I was chatting with, for the interviewing with, said to me, so how can you lead people if you're autistic? And it was as though the last 45 minutes of, talking about my achievements and talking about my ways of working and my track record of over 10 years suddenly ceased to exist because of this, new piece of information relating to my neurotype. And I am a fully capable person, and the accommodations that I was asking for weren't anything out of this world. They're very, very reasonable, according to the reasonable accommodations, aspect of disability accommodations that workplaces are required to provide. But it wasn't enough for them to give me the job. And so I left that interview knowing that I had essentially completely squashed any chances I had of getting that role.
What kills me about that story is this just highlights the real challenge that people have with, the thing that's the best for the industry and the best for humanity at a whole is often at complete odds with what is best for the individual. And, what would have been best for you as an individual might have been to have hidden that during the interview process and then brought it up later. And yet that is not what's best for society as a whole. And those two things being at conflict is very, very challenging.
Yeah, exactly right. You've hit the nail on the head, because ultimately, if I had decided to not disclose that as part of the interview process. But then I had, been successful in that position and had then requested accommodations. The reality is that it's not as though they would have accepted me with open arms then either. They might have, initiated some form of, they might have not let me complete my probation period, or they might not have, they would have put in place some other mechanism that would have ultimately probably enabled me to, be released back to industry. And so it's a bit of that double-edged sword, because I do not have the kind of disability that I would be able to have seen through that probation period, a probation period of 6 months for me. If I had attempted to, mask my way through that process, I would have almost certainly burned myself out again. And unlike last time where, I didn't really have a child or anything at that point in time, I have a kid that I have to now think about. I've got a livelihood that I need to protect. And so for me, the safest option was to try and find an organization that was going to accept me straight away, as opposed to trying to backdoor it, only to then subsequently, get pushed out in some other form anyway.
Yeah, you used a word there, which I'd just like you to elaborate on for those of the audience who might not know what that word means. You talked about masking. Can you explain what that means?
So masking is essentially the suppression of your autistic traits to, to fit more, fit more nicely into society. So that might be reducing the amount of, movement that I might undertake, to stop myself appearing as distracted, or to stop myself, appearing abnormal, or it might be forcing myself to make additional amounts of eye contact. Or it could even be thinking very, very carefully about the things that I say to make sure that they land correctly. So it's essentially a form of camouflaging yourself to try and integrate into society. But the challenge with that is that when you mask, it takes a lot of cognitive energy to do that. And it's a little bit different to the standard kind of, differences that you might exhibit as a person. So your personal self versus your work self. We know that everyone, does different things. Like, we know what professionalism is, and we know that there's that level to it. But when it comes to an autistic person masking, it adds an extra layer, and the cognitive capability that you are applying to that masking process is completely detracting from your ability to do many other things. And so it leads to a very, very exhausted person, because they are essentially, doing 125% as opposed to 100% or 70% for every single interaction or on a daily basis.
It's also really emotionally draining, because you're not being you're being somebody else. And that kind of split brain approach and that kind of feeling disconnected from the person that you're appearing to be is emotionally draining as well as cognitively draining. And that, for me, is the aspect of it that leads to burnout more than the cognitive. It's the pretense, the shield that you put up, and the mask that you put up is not who you are, and that drains me, that emotional side of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've talked about, your challenges. I've had similar challenges, but let's look at this through the lens of why we want this. Why do we want people like the Aprils of the world in our workforces? Why do we want people who are neurodiverse leading teams, being in teams, being supported? And why do we want them to not have to mask? Why do we want them to be the people that they are?
When you have a neurodiverse team, you have got a whole range of diversity of thought available at your fingertips. And when you're not confining that team to thinking through one singular lens, or behaving through a singular lens, or acting through a singular lens, you have the opportunity to actually access and utilize different perspectives of the same problem. And that for me is critical to critical thinking and problem solving skills. The ability to analyze a problem from multiple angles and really uncover those blind spots that typically crop up as a result of groupthink is really important to actually being able to find an effective solution to a problem. And when you let someone see the world through their own lens, it really opens up innovation. And a lot of what we're talking about when we're talking about letting people show up as themselves is it's harmless. It's about breaking down the standards that have been, created around these very, very trivial, norms, where if you broke those down for a second and just enabled people to come, to the table in a more authentic sense, then, we may not have as many different exercises that we currently do today, such as like the 6 thinking hats, which I don't know if you're aware of the 6 thinking hats, but essentially it's a process that enables you to have a person assigned to a particular role that enables them to only view a problem through that specific role. So basically, you're having to manufacture diversity of thought because you have stifled natural and organic diversity of thought so much that you need to implement a process in order to be able to re-extract it. So it's kind of, it's a really interesting, when I think of it through that lens, it makes sense to me that we would obviously want people to bring their various and, neuro-varied perspectives to the table.
Yeah, I like it. I'd never thought about it from that lens of it's a technique that I've used many times in facilitation, and I've never thought about it from the lens of like what the reason we're doing this is because we don't have diversity of thought. Yeah, thank you for that. And I guess this is a good kind of point to mention intersectionality as well, and it's not just one neurodiverse person does not represent the entire diversity of neurodiverse people in the same way as the intersectionality of various other aspects of diversity are particularly challenging for some people. Obviously you're a woman in technology who's neurodiverse, that adds a whole nother angle to the challenges that you personally face.
Yeah, absolutely. Intersectionality plays a huge part of it. It's really, really important to recognize exactly, the positioning and like the balance of, when it comes to diversity of thought within your group, what is your diverse makeup? Have you actually, got the right voices in the room, and are you giving them the platform that they need in order to be able to voice their perspectives effectively?
Yeah, I often see it as my role in these live streams. I love inspirational discussions. I love thought leadership. I love talking about these things and bringing awareness and making people feel excited about solving these problems. But I also want to make sure that people have real actionable things that they can take away from these live streams, things that they can go back to work on Monday and do. And so I'd love to kind of press you a little bit on that. If we've got people watching this live stream now who are maybe executives or directors and people who are senior in their organization, what are something they could do on Monday? And if you've got somebody who is maybe not as hierarchical, not as high in the hierarchy, what can they do to promote this kind of stuff? What are some actions people can take?
It's a great question because everyone has got the ability to make that difference. And for me personally, some of the strategies that I have found particularly effective in fostering that environment to promote diversity of thought, particularly as a leader with people within my own teams, it's recognizing each individual for their own unique strengths and abilities. And that's a matter of it being regardless of neurotype, right? Like if we take away for a second, the whole can of worms that comes with being safe enough to disclose your neurodivergence in the workforce, if you simply recognize each individual for their own unique strengths and understand how that person best shows up, then you work on building that environment for them. Like that is your job as a leader, is to help build the environment that is going to make every single person as part of your workforce thrive. And the correct answer in terms of how do you do that isn't to hire multiple of the same type of person, but it's to build in that fluid and that inclusive and safe environment in a really sustainable way. And so it can be really easy for organizations, especially larger organizations, the amount of learning and development that they do, it's so fantastic. And one thing that I have noticed shift from when I first went through leadership training, back in the, I think it was around 2010 or something like that, that I kind of went through my leadership training, compared to what it looks like now. Back then, you used to be told, this is the exact way that you lead people. And you were told, very specific, tools and techniques that essentially you were able to apply almost like a clone stamp to every single person in your team. Whereas now it is so much more varied, and there is so much more nuance and, dynamicism that's introduced into leadership training. And I think that, if you're somebody that hasn't been through more recent leadership training, it might be valuable for you to re-undergo that and refresh that for yourself, just to remind yourself of, the old way is not necessarily, what got you here isn't going to get you there, kind of thing. So if you're a more senior leader, then I encourage you to maybe, do a bit of a refresher of some leadership tools and techniques. And, for myself, I don't have a set standard on how I lead my teams. I really do think that the cookie cutter approach stifles innovation and creativity and safety and happiness. And it might drive consistency, but humans inherently are not consistent. So it doesn't make sense that we would apply a consistent sort of process of leading people to a species and to a cohort of people that just aren't consistent in that way. So to put that into what I mean by that, to put that into an actual practical example, if I have a person on my team that prefers to work completely autonomously and provide me with updates and deliver me their work with little input from my side, provided that they have the competency to do so, I will let them go for it. I've got a lot of, self-starting people on my team that are very, very happy to, say, when do you need this by? And then they'll just run with it. Whereas on the other side of the same coin, there are also people on my team that prefer having deadlines and prefer having tasks time boxed. And I'm going to do that for them as well, without viewing it as this inability on their behalf to work autonomously. Because the reality is, when we have tasks that we delegate out, we either need them by a certain date, or it's an open-ended date because it's not an actual urgent thing. And so regardless of which way you go, there's no harm in you as a leader helping provide some extra scaffolding around that individual to help them manage their workload better. It shouldn't be seen as a detractor to do that. It should be seen as an inherent part of your job, regardless of what level of leader you are, what scale of leadership you're currently sitting at.
Yeah. Everybody needs help in whatever way they need help, and this is another dimension in which they need help and support and structure, etc. I want to touch upon that first point you made about senior leaders, and obviously I have a bias here as somebody whose entire business is predicated upon leadership training. I am never going to say that you don't need leadership training, but I do want to give a lens to kind of reinforce what you're saying. Often leaders later on in their leadership journey kind of look back and go, I've been a leader for 10 years. Why do I need leadership training? I've been successful. I've been a leader for 10 years. I've been doing this. Why do I need to train to do something I've been doing successfully for 10 years? I think that angle, it misses the point that leadership is a profession. Leadership is a set of skills. And, you don't find a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant going, I've been a doctor for 10 years. Why do I need to go and learn new techniques? Because they accept the fact that their industry is changing. The skills you need to be successful in that industry are changing. And often these professions have entire structures around the amount of learning you need to do every year in order to stay a certified professional.
Yeah.
So they acknowledge that, yes, you might have tools and techniques that are still functional, but that doesn't mean that they're still optimal. And you can still go back. There's still new state of the art. There's still new things that you can learn. There's still things that weren't invented when you became a leader 20 years ago that exist now, and different ways of thinking. So it's just because you are a perfectly functional leader now doesn't mean that there isn't things to learn, because things have changed.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's hit upon the angle of how do we get neurodiverse people into our workforce? You spoke of your experience in that, which is obviously what we're not trying to replicate. But what are we trying to do? Like, how do we make sure that people that are neurodiverse apply for our jobs in the first place? How do we make sure that they're supported through the interview process and the hiring process? What's the best way to do that?
I think that the very first reality that we need to really, I guess, reconcile with is that we're already here and we're already in the workforce. I think one of the bigger challenges that we really have is nurturing them once they are in the workforce. We know from statistics, for example, that 70% of employed autistic people experience mental health issues as a direct result of work. We also know that 45% of autistic employees are overqualified for the roles that they hold. And, those are just two studies that I can call out from within the last 10 years of research that has been undertaken. And it's really about us actually, one, we have to acknowledge and recognize neurodivergent people are in our workforce. Our workforces are therefore already neurodiverse, but right now our structure is only supporting one particular cohort, which is the brains that can subscribe to those neuronormative working environments. And so when you're doing that, you're missing out on, the humanistic elements, of course, of being more inclusive of everybody in your workforce. And there is also, supported by research, benefits to supporting your neurodiverse workforce as well. But to answer your question more specifically about how can we get more neurodivergent individuals into the workforce, because we do also know that the unemployment rates are quite high as well. Some really, really simple things such as being able to send out interview questions in advance to give people appropriate amounts of time to actually come up with the answers to the questions. Because if you're only giving them those questions on the spot, the only thing that you're actually testing them for is their ability to think on their feet. And I mean, unless you're an air traffic controller or an emergency room doctor, do you really need to be able to, is that really what you want to predicate your entire interview process on, is how quick somebody could come up with that answer that's going to, wow you? The other thing that I always like to do is I always give out my email after an interview for anyone to reach out to me with any follow-up questions, or, if they have anything they want to add to their interview answer that they gave me. I'm also willing to hear it at that point as well, because I care more about the quality of the candidate and their experience than I do about how they've presented to me in that interview setting. And along that exact same thread, I never, ever do any sort of on-the-spot tests or homework or working sessions or anything like that. You're never going to get the best out of anybody in that kind of environment. And so I really shy away from doing any kind of, in-interview testing.
Yeah, I think you're right. We did a live stream with Anwan Simmons from GitHub a few months ago, and he said exactly the same thing. You're not interviewing people for their ability to think on their feet, because when does that happen in that high stress environment in the workplace? Very, very rarely. And when it does happen, you've got plenty of other people around you to support you.
Yeah, exactly.
We got a question from Amber here that kind of feeds into a little bit of what you were saying. Amber said, do you have any advice for a low-level, openly autistic manager in the largest tech company where the company does not see the value in introducing policies to support neurodiverse employees because they've only seen one, i.e. me? I've been trying to shift this perception. And you mentioned this a minute ago, April, where you said there already are neurodiverse people likely in your team. They're just not openly neurodiverse. How can we tackle that?
Yeah, it's a really, really tough one, because if your organization hasn't made the space, and I mean, Amber, if you've been going at this for a couple of years with no real change, that does suggest to me that it's not a safe space that's hearing it. But the things that come to my mind would be, I mean, if you've got some kind of collaborative space, either a Teams workspace or a Slack workspace or something, setting up a neurodiversity channel, it's not necessarily outing people if they join that channel, but we've done one of those at REA Group. REA Group has an absolutely thriving neurodiversity channel, and not everybody in there is neurodivergent, but the people that are in there are always learning something about neurodivergent individuals. And people from the HR team and our people and culture and DEIB teams can all jump in there to, you know, see what could help neurodivergent people, or, you know, what are some topics that are being discussed in that environment. If it's a matter of trying to show your organization that there is more than just you, Amber, in that space, then doing something like that could be really valuable. Otherwise, and I loathe to say this because the labor shouldn't be on your behalf, but you know, pulling together a bit of a business case around, you know, the statistics are relating to neurodivergence in the workplace could be another good place to start. And maybe even calling upon some of the government initiatives as well that are available, because there are a few government initiatives that lean into funding workplace training for organizations around disability. And since there are quite a few neurotypes that fall under the disability umbrella, that could be another way of trying to help encourage them, is by showing them that, you know, well, if they utilized this government program, then it wouldn't actually come at a cost to them to introduce those policies or undertake that training.
Yeah, just to double down on what you were saying about the Slack channel or the Teams group, the way that I would position something like that is neurodiverse and allies, because that by phrasing it like that, you're kind of giving license for people to join. One thing that I think is challenging, though, is sometimes there does need to be a private space just for those people who are there, and that becomes challenging to have both of those. So just think about whether the spaces you're creating are you know, inclusive of allies, or whether it needs to be a protected, safe space, and make the choice deliberately on that. We got a question from Jared. April, when managing people taking tasks from you as a leader, you handle in ways suiting the individual. How about when leading collaborative agile tech teams with lots of colleague interactions? So, you know, we all know if we do Scrum, for example, you've got daily stand-ups that could be draining. You've got retros. Maybe you're doing extreme programming, so you're doing mobbing or pairing, or maybe you're doing Kanban, where, you know, you're literally just picking the task off the top of the list. There's a lot of things there that kind of challenge the ability of a leader for you to be very specific in the way you support somebody. How would you go about helping somebody in that scenario?
This is one of my favorite questions because I actually, first and foremost, there was once upon a time in my career where I led a completely 100% remote global team where we had individuals from North America, Europe, and Australia. So the time zones were little to be desired in terms of overlap. And so fostering a team environment, even from that level, it was really challenging at first, because it's crazy how much we rely on those like synchronous conversations and those moments together to really help build that rapport. And so one of the ways that I discovered from that particular process, but that I have now applied to any team, whether they're co-located or distributed, is around implementing like a user manual working group as part of your, you know, coming together as a team. So your user manual, you might even be familiar with this, but basically it gives a little bit of an overview to others around who you are, you know, how you might like to receive feedback, you know, what your general working hours or availability hours are like, your preferred method of contact, whether it's voice notes, which is my favorite one. I'm a huge voice note fan. Or if you prefer text, or even, you know, video notes and things like that, or potentially even phone calls. Doing that for each and every single team member, it then gives every single person on that team an awareness of how you are all going to work together. And it makes people, you know, all figure out how to compromise when they need to, and how to give each other the grace when they need to as well. So at that particular point, it's not about catering to one particular person's specific needs, but it's about holistically as a group, how can we work best together to foster consideration for each other, but still get things done. I found that to be really, really useful. Every time I've ever done user manuals, it has really had a very marked difference in the way team members interact with each other. And Of course, there's times where if the person that prefers the written communication has to jump on a phone call with somebody else because that person prefers a phone call, because it's a give and take relationship and you're learning to do that compromise and to balance it out together, nobody feels, as though they're getting the short end of the stick. Everyone feels as though it's a team environment. So that can be a really useful method if you haven't already done a process like that, Jared.
When we think about, and I promise this is related, it sounds like a tangent. When we think about accessibility in technology, say people with low vision or low auditory capacity or physical issues, and we design software so that these people can operate the software, it makes that software better for everybody, not just those people. Yes. If you're a father who's holding their baby in one hand, and so you've only got another hand free, having a user interface that is easy to use with a single hand helps me as a father just as much as it helps somebody who has mobility problems. And I like what you're saying here, because there's huge analogies with this. If you build a team environment and you build ways of working that work well for neurodiverse people, they work better for neurotypical people as well. Where we're not making something that compromises for neurodiverse. We're making something that is better for everybody. A very specific question from Kate, and maybe we take this offline because I'm not expecting you to say URLs specifically, but Kate is after some resources for those stats.
Yeah, it's no worries. I have got some specific Australian resources that I can shoot through, Kate. Every country is doing, their own research, so I can appreciate the desire for some specific Australian ones, which I'll take note of this and make sure that we get them over to you.
Yeah, is this a good opportunity to talk about your passion project?
Yeah, sure. So off the back of my rather harrowing re-entry back into the workforce, I did realize that there was not a huge amount of resource available for neurodivergent individuals that may have, masked and, grinded their way into positions of, higher than entry level roles, but then subsequently needed support to help actually transform that into a sustainable career. So off the back of that, I built a not-for-profit organization called the Neurodiversity Network. And that is a career hub for neurodivergent talent to help them unlock meaningful and sustainable careers for themselves. So within that hub, we have got communities so that you can reach out to other like-minded people that are, on that same journey as you of trying to build sustainability into your career, because it feels as though it's either, one or the other. As a neurodivergent person, you either don't get to actually have a meaningful career where you might, climb in levels of seniority because it gets too unsustainable for you. Or if you do decide to climb the ladder, then it just you basically are forfeiting being able to have an enjoyable life outside of work, because every single part of your emotional and cognitive capacity is dedicated to actually succeeding at work. Which that one that I just told you was exactly the one that I did, and I can tell you that the end station that you land at is not a pretty one. And so I really want to help other neurodivergent people around the world not have that exact same experience, which is why I created the hub.
There's a huge amount of resources on there. I recommend everybody go and have a look at that and spend some time with it. Whether you're somebody who is neurodiverse and wants to find help, or you're somebody who wants to be more aware of neurodiversity and help people who need the help, I think there's a lot of great resources on there. I want to finish this with again some actionable things that people can do. If you're somebody who is a tech leader and you've got somebody who is neurodiverse in your team, how do you help them if they don't necessarily want to be open with the fact that they're neurodiverse with everybody else other than just you?
Look, it's actually a very real situation that pops up a lot around that. I have encountered many times in my career where someone has expressed to me, they are neurodivergent, but they have not wanted it to be shared more broadly due to the stigma. And in that particular scenario, the biggest thing that I do is deliver like not specific training, but I deliver specific environmental prompts that help that person be more accepted and more included in a way that doesn't out them. So, for example, I've had somebody reach out to me one time and say, oh, such and such, they always seem disengaged when we're on Zooms together. They're looking off in the other direction. They're not really, wanting to, they're not really looking at the camera. I feel like they're on their phone or something. Like they just don't seem to be engaged. And I have always responded back, but have they been replying to you as though they're engaged? Have they been have their responses been directly related to what you've said to them? And the answer has pretty much always been yes, at which point I've said, so they probably just have a different way of thinking or pondering something. Just because someone isn't staring at the camera or isn't, have their face or their body square with the camera, that doesn't mean that they're disengaged, especially if the responses that are coming out of their mouth that they're verbalizing back to you are on point with what you would have expected from somebody that was actively engaged. So I try to advocate as much as I can without tying it back necessarily to, oh, this person has a disability or this person is neurodivergent. I prefer more of a universal design approach where I try to help others recognize that there is more than one way of existing.
Yeah, and even if that person isn't a diagnosed neurodiverse person, they might be aspects of who they are that applies to. It's a generic approach that works for everybody, but specifically helps neurodiverse people. Exactly right. Brilliant. We're reaching the top of the hour. I cannot believe we have got here so quickly. It always just disappears on these live streams. I say that every single time. While we start wrapping up, I just want to talk about the next live stream we have. So coming up in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to be joined by Martin. We're going to talk about projects are dead, long-lived products, the difference between running a product way of doing things and running a project way of doing things. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of that feedback that you're going to give us after this, April. I'm sure you've got a lot of opinions on this. I'd love to hear them after you watch the live stream. Also, if you want to know more about me and what I do, you can go to that middle link. I do these live streams pretty regularly on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitch. I suggest you watch them on YouTube. The user experience is far superior. If you ever want to have a chat with me, I've done this every single live stream for the past 6 months. And do you know how many people have booked in a 20-minute chat with me? One person. I genuinely mean this. I love talking about this stuff. I love discussing it. It is not going to be a sales call. It is going to be a chat with two people that love talking about this stuff. Genuinely, please book in 20 minutes with me. I just love talking about all of this stuff, and it gets me excited and makes me happy. So if you've got any challenges you want me to help you with, if you've got anything you want to tell me, if you're interested in being on the live streams, please book in that 20-minute chat with me. Anything you want to share, April, other than the Neurodiversity Network for the folks at home?
Not at all. Just thank you so much for joining and being interested in this topic. The more people that proactively show interest, then the more neuroaffirming a world we can create together. Yeah,
for everybody that's joined, I second that. This is a topic that we cannot talk about too much. It's a topic that we should keep talking about, and if this is the first time you've attended any kind of discussion of this topic, I hope it is the start of you spending more time learning about it. If you're somebody who is deep in this area, then I hope this just keeps you down the journey, and please share your thoughts and your feelings and your suggestions and your comments in the chat. Let's just keep talking about this. I don't want the conversation to end when the live stream does. I want to keep talking on LinkedIn and YouTube about this. Thank you very much, April, for joining me. If you couldn't tell, April's feeling a little bit under the weather, and I genuinely genuinely thank you for spending this amount of time with me while you're feeling a little bit sick. It shows how passionate you are about this topic, and how much you want to see the world change. So thank you, April, for joining me, and thank you everybody at home for watching. And I will see you next time on a Tech Leaders Launchpad live stream. Goodbye.